Adam Eve's abilities might genuinely be some of the most broken powers in fiction, so why doesn't she fully utilize them? And why is her younger self more powerful than the Eve we see today? We all know Eve has mental blocks placed on her mind, preventing her from influencing living matter. But the trade-off is that she can manipulate everything else. So people or living entities are off limits, but she can very well create forests and turn cloth into metal, or an apple into gold. Even air. As we see in the fight against Conquest, she literally makes the air more dense, making it harder for Conquest to move. But there's no real reason she should be limited in a fight. Yet almost every time we see her, she defaults to the same thing: shields and glass barriers. Even worse, she thinks she's doing something.
But it's time to go.
What did he say?
Eve could have turned the Thraxans' guns into Play-Doh, their armor into liquid concrete, and that should have been it. Actually, she should have been able to win almost every fight she's ever been in. This is why Kid Adam Eve is ultimately stronger. Not because she's more powerful than adult Eve, but because she's more creative with the exact same power. The only factor in whether Eve gets more powerful is her limiter being disabled, which is only shown happening whenever Eve is on the verge of death, being mentally or physically pushed to her limit. Even then, Kid Eve's limiter breaking and how she decided to use that power was still more impressive than when Eve fought against Conquest. If Eve had simply erased Conquest's mind, like her younger self did after the government killed her family, they would have won. And the concept of good conquest would have been a real possibility. But Kid Eve being stronger simply comes down to one thing: her creativity under pressure. We know that she can only manipulate things that already exist, but this is easier said than done, as this means that Eve has to not only figure out what to manipulate, she has to think about how she wants to manipulate it in a way that benefits her combat. Even the spear Eve uses against Conquest requires multiple steps happening almost instantly. She first transmutes the surrounding air molecules into a solid material, forms the structure itself, then launches it at Conquest. Which again, sounds easy on paper, but in an actual fight, especially against stronger opponents, the less time Eve has to think, the more mistakes she's going to make. Like when she transmutes the inside of a spiked ball into water instead of lava. And this reveals something important about Eve's powers that most people overlook. They are not instant. They are process-based. Every action requires movement, sequencing, and thought. We consistently see this throughout the series, especially during her fight against Multipole, where Eve starts using both hands to create larger structures faster and with greater control over area and space. And this also reveals another limitation. Eve can't simply create a perfect object with every property already built into it. She has to create the structure first, then alter the molecular properties afterwards. Meaning Eve can create an apple, then turn that apple into gold. But she likely can't instantly create a golden apple from nothing. And honestly, this explains almost everything about the way she fights. Because whenever Eve creates walls, weapons, or barriers, we constantly see the structure form first before becoming denser or gaining additional properties. Even the forests and trees she creates support this idea. The wood forms almost instantly because she's extending and manipulating the material that already exists naturally. And even this usually requires both hands. This would also explain why Eve constantly defaults to bulletproof glass constructs during combat, because they are faster to form, easier to manipulate, and flexible enough to instantly weaponize with one hand, which adds even more steps to her powers. And this is exactly why Eve had to place water inside the spiked ball before Conquest hit it. Instead of simply creating a pre-water filled weapon instantly, she had to think, react, decide, and execute all within seconds. Now at this point, you might ask, if Eve can't instantly create objects with completed properties, then what exactly is the pink matter she uses? Because she's clearly creating shields, armor, weapons, and complex structures while they already possess durability and shape. But the important part is, the pink matter Eve creates always behaves the same way. It exists somewhere between a liquid and a solid during formation, fluid enough to reshape instantly, yet stable enough to create durable geometric structures. And honestly, the closest real-world comparison would probably be glass. More specifically, an amorphous solid, which would completely explain why Eve's constructs shape into solids quickly, reshape fluidly, remain translucent, and shatter under excessive force. The matter Eve uses behaves almost exactly like molten glass. And what makes amorphous solids different from crystalline solids is that their molecular structure is irregular and disordered, making them much easier to manipulate and mold. This is why molten glass can become almost anything: weapons, armor, walls, fibers, even ropes. And once cooled, it solidifies. But despite changing states, the matter itself remains the same, which is exactly how Eve's constructs behave. This also explains why Eve's barriers shatter. She can immediately pull those same fragments back toward herself to form armor, turning the matter back into its more fluid state before solidifying again. The matter never changes, only its state does. And because molten glass can even be stretched into flexible fibers in real life, it also explains how Eve is able to create flexible weapons and elastic structures that still shatter like glass when broken. All of these properties stay consistent whether Eve is a child or an adult. But Kid Eve ultimately becomes the better fighter because she's less restrained, she's less conditioned, and less focused on the correct way to use her powers in the moment. Kids are spontaneous, and adult Eve knows this, which is why she prefers using her powers for the betterment of the world through creating farms, parks, forests, and cities, instead of purely using them for combat. This is also why adult Eve constantly falls back on shields, because with civilians at risk and enemies doing whatever they can to win, shields are the one thing she can reliably create without sacrificing too much thought in the middle of a fight. Which makes perfect sense, because Eve was made to create, not destroy. The primary function of her powers was always associated with building and reshaping the world around her, not necessarily combat. And this is exactly why her siblings were such terrifying opponents, as unlike Eve, they were made for combat, turning their own bodies into weapons, which is why I honestly think Kid Eve's fight against her siblings is vastly more impressive than her fight against Conquest. Because not only was she trying to protect civilians, she was also fighting opponents capable of manipulating and mutating their own biology to some degree. They were arguably the perfect counter to Eve. Yet despite this, Kid Eve constantly stays on her toes, reacting and adapting within seconds while being forced to fight at close range, which overall put her at a massive disadvantage. And her brother, also known as Phase 2, was genuinely a monster. The fact that he ultimately dies from exhaustion and his own body literally falling apart is honestly insane, even giving Eve the Jason Todd treatment, which really shows just how durable both Kid Eve and her brother actually are. And honestly, it makes me wish the series expanded more on Eve's siblings and their abilities, because they might genuinely be some of the most underrated threats in Invincible. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if you think I'm completely wrong about Eve's powers, or if you think Kid Eve is actually weaker. I'm currently on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and all your support is appreciated. Have a fantastic day. Soul out.